Smoking Ghost. Firstly, a little bit of background information on my house. I lived here for the vast majority of my life, except for a 3-year gap while I was at university. My parents bought the house when I was 6 months old from a group of elderly siblings after one of them died. It's a rather old house, built somewhere in the 30s during World War II, and still has an air raid shelter in the garden. The encounter took place in the bathroom, however. This room was originally a bedroom and wasn't converted into a bathroom for about 8 or 9 years after we moved in. It was, however, in a great state of disrepair, and we never used it as it was unsafe until we converted it. I'm not sure of the date as this took place at least 10 years ago now, but it was still several years after we turned the room into a bathroom. Anyways, it was rather late at night, and I stood by the sink, brushing my teeth before bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a grayish mist floating by the toilet to my left, but when I turned to look properly, there was nothing there. I didn't think much of it, but then moments later, I got the sensation that someone walked behind me and outside the door to my right, and as this happened, I got a very distinct smell of cigarettes. The typical smell of a heavy smoker, which vanished after a few seconds. Now, the window was shut, and my family are all non-smokers, so no one had smoked in that house for well over a decade, so there was no logical explanation I could think of. The next day, I mentioned what happened to my mom, and she told me that the people who lived here before, the siblings, were all heavy smokers. I did not know this before the incident. I just knew that there were 3 of them and one of them died, and the other 2 still lived over the road. I've always felt that this house was quite spooky, and had heard the odd strange noise and such, but had never experienced smelling anything or seeing mist, and I've never experienced anything that big since. The Smoking Ghost. My experience takes place in Robins Hood Bay, Yorkshire. I shall describe the house to you. The house is very old and detached. From the windows, you can see the sea. It is a holiday home, and previously the owners of the house parents lived there. Upstairs, there are 3 bedrooms. One is a double room, one is a twin room, and the other is a single room, which are all connected by a long corridor with a toilet and bathroom at the far end. Downstairs, there's a very old toilet, which is next to the kitchen. The kitchen is connected to a washroom and dining room. The dining room is attached to the living room, and the living room is attached to the very old toilet, sort of in a circuit. In the dining room, there are some old French doors, which are seldom open at night, but almost always unlocked. Apart from when we were either not in or in bed, most of the family came in through the back doors, as during the day, someone was always in, so they were unlocked. I apologize for my poor description. My aunt and uncle had come to visit us on holiday, and one night, we decided to play cards. My uncle had gone out for some fresh air after dinner, and it was just my aunt, my mom, and I. My dad and my brother were in the other room, not paying any attention to this. It was rather dark outside. After several games of spoons, we started to smell what I can only describe as a faint, sweet smell around the room. As the games continued, the smell gradually got stronger and stronger and stronger, until it was the distinct scent of pipe tobacco smoke. We ignored the smell and carried on playing cards until suddenly I started to feel really, really sad, like miserable. I felt alone and I hated. So I burst into tears. The feeling went as quickly as it came, and out of nowhere, I felt my normal self again. I started laughing with a shock, and we all noticed that after I had stopped crying, the smell of tobacco had vanished as well. Around about the same time, my uncle burst through the front door out of breath as he said he saw a dark figure leaving the dining room. When asked why he thought it was a stranger and not my dad or my brother or anyone else, he said the figure was too tall to be either of them. That night I couldn't sleep because I was scared the tall man would come for me again. However, I can't decide whether he was a demonic spirit or just someone lonely. The spirit of cigarette smoking men. During my college days, I had a lecturer. This particular incident happened with my lecturer in the year 1987. During that time, my lecturer, I'll call her Mrs. D, and her husband were in search of another house since they were fed up of the congested life in an apartment building. The couple managed to get an old house in South Bombay. The couple was happy since they managed to make a very reasonable deal, as the property prices in Bombay were soaring in the late 1980s. The house was earlier owned by an aristocratic family who sold it since the family was migrating to the USA. Mrs. D and her husband quickly shifted up into their new house as soon as possible, and they got all their possessions inside the house. The house had been built in the 1930s by some British family staying there. The couple enjoyed their stay for a few days until things started to get freaky. One night at around 12:45 a.m., when Mrs. D got up from bed to have some drinking water, she suddenly spotted someone in the veranda of the house. She spotted a man in his 20s standing in the veranda, leaning on the veranda railings, smoking a cigarette. The man was wearing clothes of English attire, as people used to wear in the 1940s and 1950s, along with a hat. She asked the man who he was, but it seemed that the man was unable to hear her. He was not at all responding to her words and was too engaged in his smoking. She kept asking him, but then he suddenly disappeared at around 1:30 a.m. in thin air. Mrs. D told the incident to her husband, who also saw the same man the next night in the veranda, and the man again suddenly disappeared into thin air. The spirit of the man, however, never used to utter even a single word or even get into an eye contact with anyone. It used to seem like he only wanted to smoke and nothing else. The couple was scared with their experience and consulted a psychiatrist a few days after. The psychiatrist accompanied the couple for a night at the couple's home and also witnessed the occurrence of the man in the veranda. The psychiatrist took photos of the man, but after developing the photos, the man was not visible in any of those photos. The psychiatrist seemed to be helpless in solving the problem of the couple and asked them to stay away from the haunted house. Mrs. D and her husband shifted back in their old apartment building and decided to get rid of the haunted house. Mr. D somehow managed to sell the house to a construction company after a few years. Today, a shopping mall stands in the place of the old house. As of late, no one has heard to have experienced the spirit of the cigarette-smoking man. But even today, Mrs. D gets nightmares of the cigarette-smoking men. Cigarette fumble. During the time between my grandmother's passing and my grandfather's passing, whenever I would smoke a cigarette, and I did that quite a lot, the cigarette would start to shake as if someone were trying to push it out of my hand. My grandmother never liked the fact that my dad smoked, and I think it may have been her way of telling me to not smoke. Even to this day, it's been well over a year since my grandfather's passing. Sometimes when I am smoking, my cigarette seems to be snatched from my hand and dropped on the ground. It's weird. I'm not sure if it's my grandparents telling me not to smoke or if it's all just in my head and me thinking that it is them. Well, tell me what you think. I would love to talk to my grandparents, but I don't really like to use Ouija boards or whatnot because of something that happened to me about 4 or 5 years ago. Thank you for reading, and I might be giving updates, and I'll be posting my past events about Ouija boards in a later post. Feel free to comment or email me. Thank you.